What's up guys, the Strong Boys 19 here. So this is going to be the next review for the Black Sabbath discography once again. And it is going to be on the band's 8th studio album entitled Never Say Die. The album was released in 1978 and Vertigo Records once again was the record label. And this is the final Black Sabbath album to be released with the classic lineup. So after the release of Technical Ecstasy, there was a lot of difficulties, a lot more usage of the drugs and alcohol that really took a brutal toll in the band. And at one rehearsal, Osbourne decided to leave and quit the band entirely, and he wanted to form a different band in his own space. So they replaced him with a friend of Black Sabbath called Dave Walker, who had been a singer for bands of Fleetwood Mac and Savoy Brown. And while Ozzy was in his own space, Black Sabbath eventually did write material that would become this kind of sound for this album, and they had done an appearance on a show called Look Here. But then things did not work out, and then Ozzy was pleading the band to come back to the guys, which they eventually did bring Ozzy back. There was so much difficulties between the rest of the band, and they had recorded this album in a different studio because they recorded Technical Ecstasy in Miami's own Criteria Studios in Florida. This album had been recorded in Toronto with the record label of Sound Interchange Studios. The band had spent 5 months making this album, which was the longest amount of time that the band had took to record this album. It was the longest recording process for Black Sabbath since Sabotage back in 1975. Now, a lot of people would say that this album is a better album than Technical Ecstasy. However, in my opinion, I think that Technical Ecstasy has more of a better direction and approach to the songwriting that they had done. So, with this album, hear me out, Black Sabbath at this point wanted to go back to basics, to their blues-oriented sound, because before Black Sabbath became Black Sabbath, they had a different band name called Earth, and they were a blues rock band. But before Earth came about, Tony Iommi was in a different band called Mythology, and they were a blues band. So what Black Sabbath wanted to do on this album is, as I said, like the Beatles, to return back to basics in a blues-oriented sound. There are some positives that I will talk about this album. However, whilst listening to the album, there are some unfortunate drawbacks that I will have to address. The production of this album is very mediocre. I will have to say that some of the guitar sounds have just a little bit of a weak and cheap sounding distortion. The same with the sound of the bass, which just doesn't have, some oomph. But the drums sounds pretty decent. And like on Technical Ecstasy, the band had used different instruments, again with more of the keyboard-driven sound that they had done on previous albums. And the synthesizer sounds on this album can be just a little bit thin as well. The sleeve for the album was the second, following Technical Ecstasy by Hypnosis, and the US and UK releases differed slightly in the faint images of British military pilots seen in the sky. The inner bag featured graphics in keeping with the sleeve and credits, but no lyrics. The airplane on the cover appears to be a North American T6 Texan. However, this was not originally intended to be the next album cover. The album cover that was intended originally was Difficult to Cure, one of Rainbow's later albums, which was again created by Hypnosis' Storm Thorgerson. The first song, the title track of this album, is a really good track. It has a hard rocking kind of groove. It's got a memorable beat to it and a strong chorus and some blues style of lead playing. While it may not be as strong as the other opening songs, but Never Say Die is a good song to start the album off. And speaking of the synthesizers, The next song, Johnny Blade, is very synthesizer driven. It starts out with the weird and freaky kind of noises on the introduction, but then the sound of the song gets dark tone of guitars, and it becomes more progressive as the lyrics go by, and more of the synthesizer driven sounds being taking over the music in the mix. But this song took me quite a long while to appreciate, but I really like this song. The next song, Junior's Eyes, is a really deep one in a personal level, because around this time Ozzy Osbourne's father had passed, and Junior's Eyes was the song that Black Sabbath had done with Dave Walker before he was out of the band, with different lyrics, but Ozzy decided to rewrite the lyrics based on what was happening to his father, and it really shows his soft, kind of an emotional kind of state of singing, and it's quite jazzy in these soft spots at first, but then it just gets into heartfelt approach in the music side of things on the chorus, to more on the soft vocals from Ozzy. Another song that I do like is Shockwave. It is quite on a bit of an aggressive tone as it goes along. It's like on a similar hard rocking kind of vein like the title track, but I do think that this song has really impressive guitar solos with Iommi's style of playing. But my favorite song on this album is the song Air Dance, and this is easily the most experimental. I really, really like this song. It's, in my opinion, my favorite underrated Sabbath song ever. Love this song from start to finish. Vocals wise, it's similar to Junior's Eyes, but with some higher range in Ozzy's singing. But the song starts with some wonderful Thin Lizzy style lead guitar playing, but then it goes into some soft jazzy kind of spots in the verses, but then as the song continues on, it goes into some more of the piano driven tone, some improvisations on the lead, and it just really goes into many different spots. But Air Dance to me is a masterpiece of a song. Some of the drawbacks that I have with this album: A Hard Road. A Hard Road is a song that is not bad, but I just find the song to be really repetitive. It just doesn't really have like a good sense of direction, and it just, goes on too long. And this is the only Sabbath song that all of the guys do the vocals towards the end of the song. One of the other songs that I am not keen on is Over to You, which is okay musically and lyrically, but again, like A Hard Road, it's just not really that special, and it's not one of the songs that tries to get something better out of it. But the weakest song on this album is, for me, Breakout, which is just 2.5 minutes on a repetitive guitar riff, and then suddenly goes into sounds of trumpets and saxophone lead in the song, and it just does not go anywhere. It's just on a loop with some of these high-pitched saxophone solos. It does not fit, and this could have been better if a band like Pink Floyd or King Crimson would do, because those two bands had been writing music with those kinds of sounds. But with Black Sabbath, for this song, this is completely unfitting, and it's just a derivative song that spoils the entire album for me. Swing in the Chain is a decent closing track. Again, like It's Alright from Technical Ecstasy, it has Bill Ward on lead vocals, and his voice on this one is like more on a raw kind of vocal range, and then it's just going into on a really bluesy, distorted markup territory with some harmonica, and the song itself is just not bad. A little bit of weak lyricism, but I would say that it was just not as perfect of a fitting closing track. I do like it for what it is, but it's just not as good as Dirty Women. Other than that, Never Say Die is an album that is, to me, not one of the masterpieces, and after the release of this album, a few years later when Ozzy went solo, he absolutely loathed this album. He said that it was the worst piece of work that he had anything to do with it. So he despised this album. But I would say that this album really took me a long while to appreciate it. And I do think that it is a good album to end off the classic lineup in Black Sabbath's discography. It's just the weakest in terms of the first era, from the first album to this album. So, with that being said, I'm going to give Never Say Die by Black Sabbath a 7 out of 10. I think it's the really acceptable rating that I could give with this album, despite some of the drawbacks that I had with it. I do like this album for what it is. Thank you guys for watching, and I'll keep you guys posted for more videos in the near future.